Hello and welcome to Biology Career Insights, the podcast where we talk with experts from the field of biology to gain valuable insights into their careers and explore ways to navigate the job market in this ever evolving field. I'm your host, Dr. Manish Kumar. Today, we are joined by Aatraye Almast. Aatraye is a bioscience entrepreneur by training and a scientist at heart. She holds dual degrees in science and entrepreneurship from IIT Roorkee, Delhi University, and the University of Cambridge. Aatraye has worked in over 4 countries as part of startups like Phynova, Root Analysis, and large companies like Merck and BioNTech across innovation, digitalization, product management in healthcare and life sciences. Her last 5 years were focused on digitalization and data analytics, where she co-created products that serve needs of bioscience industry, including for her own startup called ConnectedCareMe. She's now part of BioNTech, a biotech based out of Mainz, Germany, that created the first authorized COVID mRNA vaccine. In her role, she brings digital and data strategy to life to BioNTech by finding the right problems and solutions that can help drug discovery expedite. She has had a chance to being an intrapreneur and an entrepreneur in both building and managing teams and communities and working on bold and visionary ideas. Her core values are trust, fairness, transparency, freedom of speech, and curiosity. Her life vision is to make positive change in healthcare, making it a right instead of luxury, as it might be perceived in medium to low income countries. She loves learning and recently added skiing and swimming to her list and starting out with Python at the start of this year. Thank you so much for joining us today, Aatraye.
Thank you so much for inviting me for this.
So, we'll start right from the beginning. What inspired you to pursue a career in science, and how did you get started in your field?
Yeah, I have to say, for people with my background, this is quite a obvious answer. I come from a family of doctors, 3 generations. For me, listening to biology, medical words at home during lunch was just too normal. Too normal, I say, because often my father would discuss as a radiologist what he would see on MRI scan, which sometimes were very icky details that I don't think were lunch conversations, but we did have them. And I have to say, the rest of the science came from listening to these things and realizing that the world is a puzzle to be solved. And once you have those tools to, let's say, diagnose how to sense the world, um, the madness can make sense. So in a way, let's say I had lucky origins to be born into a family where we were talking science all the time. But it stuck with me. I have to say I'm the only child in my generation who pursued biology, and that was because I realized human beings can be understood at a level of, let's say, biology, psychology, and of course um, human behavior. And I chose to find my way to understand through biology.
Amazing. So, are you one of those who also wanted to become a doctor in as a child? Because I've kind of doing this podcast with several people, and I find the similarity that I mean, most of them wanted to become a doctor, and then they ended up being a biologist. So, perhaps you can highlight
Yeah,
upon
yeah.
that.
I think so. So let me start by saying 100%. Let's be clear, right? Again, born in India, you come with legacy of, oh, my grandfather was a surgeon, my grandma was a gynecologist, and you have to carry on that. Not because it's a matter of just pride of being a part of, let's say, medical family, but also, doctors in those days. I want to go back to my grandparents, were known for being the protectors of society, right? So you wanted that purpose of some sort. I think the reason many of us wanted to, though, become doctors is because we didn't know what else could we do if we wanted science or biology to be specific. So, for me, I didn't even know what a research path looked like, felt like. Although there were doctors around, they couldn't tell me anything about research. So yes, I was one of those who started by, let's say, wanting to follow the path of my previous generations. But there came a lucky chance in life, and many of the students today maybe not see it that way, but you will. I couldn't clear any of the entrances in the first year, and I sat there thinking, why am I not pushing to even bother? What's wrong with me? Like, I care because, I don't like losing, but this particular failure doesn't make me that sad. So there's something off, right? So I said, you know what? Of course, with counseling from my parents, I said, okay, I'm going to start doing biochemistry and see where this goes. This was my bachelor's. I think within 6 months, I realized that for me, because I didn't understand, I could understand the fundamentals of biology by not becoming a doctor. I thought that was the only way. So, in short, yes, I come from that breed of wanting to become doctors. But let's say a lot of list of failed experiences taught me of the other paths that existed. And
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. It's a good one. I'd say failure. I'm the one to say iterate early, fail early, and then you know what all other options exist. So you will never run out of options. That's one message. If you have passion, if you have curiosity, and more importantly, if you have purpose, you find purpose, you will not run out of options.
Amazing. So, I mean, you also have a very unique background. Perhaps you can highlight your education a bit more, like, after your bachelor's in biochemistry, what happened next in your life, perhaps.
Yeah,
That would be.
absolutely. So, as I said, I stumbled upon biochemistry, right? And I was still in those phases of, okay, now 3 years are done. I like the concepts. I can, for example, understand why, for example, we're all getting fat, because I like the concept of biochemistry in terms of understanding metabolic cycles and so forth. So, I started to really get obsessed about the idea of, simply put, why are people thin or fat? You have very different foods and diets and genetics and so forth. So that was that, but I didn't know what next. So as always, you apply for programs. I was primarily interested in biotechnology and bioinformatics, to be specific. But back then, bioinformatics in India, at least, was not that famous or sexy as a field to pick up. So I said, okay, what can I do? So I learned, okay, I'm interested in mice. At least let me be. I can't experiment on humans. So what lets me get closer to understanding this setup? And that was biotechnology. I got the privilege to go study that in IIT Roorkee, one of the only two institutes in IITs that offer this at a master's in science level. And I say this because that experience really opened my eyes towards the world beyond science and limiting yourself in that world. So let me be specific. IIT as an organization is not just scientists, right? You've got technology, you've got management, you've got all that together. And let's say those are my first steps towards realizing, great, I know all these concepts of how humans work, how machines work, how things work. What do I do with that, right? And let's say in the last 6 months of my master's, I was doing a research project, but in parallel, I started working for now what's called Roots Analysis, which was a market research company started out by another IIT alumni as a startup, right? So I said, okay, let me just support this and see what that looks like. So I was paid this little amount of money, let's say, to start understanding, what do you mean by Alzheimer's market? What do you mean by monoclonal antibody market? Projections, all these business words started to come to my ear.
Mhm.
I said, wait a second. So basically, we could do whatever we want in clinical research, and none of this could see the light of the day. So this purpose I'm looking for would be useless. Interesting. I need to know more. So I looked around and I noticed everyone was applying for PhDs. That was tricky, because I had no
This
intention of.
was, Aatraye,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, just to
No, no,
clarify.
please go ahead.
Root analysis happened during your master thesis,
It did.
or
It did.
okay.
Yes. In my master's thesis, I was doing a
Mhm.
dual, let's say, dual internships. I was allowed to do that. I
Mhm.
was working in the lab very specifically on obesity and diabetes through jamun,
Mhm.
which meant we were looking at extracting flavonoids that basically help with either um, avoiding insulin resistance, increasing fat molecule development, and so forth. But in parallel, let's say in my night job, I was doing these research assignments to understand the market of certain
Mhm.
either disease areas or technology landscapes. So yeah, it happened during the last 6 months of my master's.
Mhm.
And maybe that's a message for all as well. Look out for these kind of random opportunities, right? So I remember like my classmates, and I'm not saying they were not doing the right thing, I'm just saying their interests were
Mhm.
different. They were looking for the next lab research assignment, were looking for the next place to go learn a bit more about, I don't know, particular aspect, let's say, of plant biotechnology. And I was like, no, I want to know what happens when all of this sees approval, or firstly, what is approval and how do I access this as a person like my mom who has no idea what I'm doing in the lab. How does she access this medication? And that's when, this roots analysis ad caught my attention, because that's how they said, they placed themselves. Do you want to know what happens next? Which is
Mhm.
great.
But
Because you're
Atul,
right, we don't know.
perhaps you can also, tell the students, or like, we have to convey a message that you have to keep looking around, because I'm sure like you were more aware and you were looking around. That's how root analysis happened, because it did not happen to many people having the same, access of information. So looking around, as you also
Looking
mentioned, is
around,
very important. Yeah.
absolutely, Manish. And
Mhm.
I like to stress this more because I don't fit that typical scientist profile that you might see.
Mhm.
Why? Because I like my books, I like my lab, but I'm also constantly asking, why am I doing this? Constantly. Now, many will tell you, it's kind of recalibrating,
Mhm.
um, why you exist as a human being. So it's too philosophical sometimes, and it's an existential question you don't want to ask. But because I ask this, I, to your point, keep
Mhm.
my ears open to talk to more people, read
Mhm.
information outside of my preferred area. So completely agreed with you.
Mhm.
And I like to carry this on and say, this willingness to know outside of science, um, it only became stronger once I went for my second master's at University of Cambridge, which was the next step
Mhm.
to pursue a program called bioscience and entrepreneurship.
Mhm.
Because,
And I'm gonna ask more questions
sorry,
about that,
you go
but
ahead
yeah,
then.
but no, but you were mentioning about root analysis and stuff, and just
Yeah,
I
yeah,
said, yeah. So that happened during your IIT, and that kind of, I think inculcated your interest in these commercial aspects of science, right?
correct, absolutely.
And how did you go about not to do a PhD? Because that's what 90% of MSc students
Yeah,
end up doing.
yeah.
So how did that happen?
So yeah. Now I'm getting you, because it's sometimes, I put a rose-colored filter over it now, so
Mhm.
I don't think about it too much. But let me start by saying this: I had a lot of funny support and criticism at the same time from my professors. So I'm not here to brag, but I was uh, I scored the highest in 10 years in that course,
You were
something
the
along these
topper.
lines.
So I mean, yeah,
Yes,
nothing to
let's
brag
just
about, but
put
yeah,
it this way.
that's yeah.
Um, and I remember two of my very close professors. I really like them. They sat with me and counseled me as to, it's going to be a loss if you don't do a PhD. I've heard you've not applied to any of the labs. We've heard you've not applied to any organizations abroad. It's going to be a loss. What are you thinking? So, um, it was difficult because
Mhm.
it almost felt like I was not filling the expectations of my professors who had spent those 2 years of hard work on me. And many people also would say, oh, you took this very valid seat of another student who had done miracles in research, right? And you wasted it, that kind of stuff. So that did happen.
Mhm.
But what I can tell you is two stories, which gave me the courage to think differently. One is a good story, which was of my direct professor lead in my thesis. I would like to shout out his name. His name was Dr. Aatraye, still is. And what he did is, so during the 6 months I worked in his lab, we used to meet once in 2 weeks or something, and then I would give him updates on what I was doing and ask him questions, right? And those questions were never about the science, but about the business of science. So I was always asking him, so about these QETs, and I mean, how much, if I break one, like, what does it even mean in terms of costs? And then I used to ask him, how are you funding like these projects? How are these things coming together? Why do we take so long to get the mice in the experiments? I was asking all these enabler questions rather than the science. And he kind of walked me through, maybe that's where your interest lies. Maybe you want to make the process of getting to the output faster, and maybe you're not that interested in the science itself. And I said, I'm not sure about that, it hurts my heart. But it's this first story that opened my brain towards, maybe I don't want to do a PhD because I will not do justice to that. I can't commit myself to 3 or 5 years depending on the country you go study in. And the second one, again, I would say it's more of a failure story, and for the listeners, something to think about. So I had a life plan, you know, study, do this, then get married, and then have kids, and then all that. Let's just say, without going into those details, none of those plans worked out after the masters. And I had to
So
really
you had
rethink.
those
That's what I
plans
mean.
during your master's itself, like all
Yeah,
those
yeah, yeah.
life
I
plans.
had my
Okay.
plan. No, I had my plans since high school, I think. Forget masters. I had like this entire 15-year plan made up, right? How
Oh,
I will
wow.
end up at the age of 35 or 40. And it's like the cards started to fall in my background, in my personal life, in some way. And I realized, interesting, I don't think I will. Yeah, those plans are not making sense, which is why I mentioned, right? I always kept going on the why. So let's say certain failures in my personal life made me again rethink, why did I want to do a bachelor's and a master's and a PhD and then maybe become a professor or maybe a teacher in a school? Like, why am I thinking so limited? There's a world out there. So yeah, finding a mentor like my professor, like I mentioned, and personal changes. In short, I don't do a PhD. It was hard, Manish, I
Mhm,
have to say. Like, for everyone else,
mhm,
if you feel you're not meeting expectations of the general audience,
mhm.
be ready for this. It
No,
will
and
happen.
I tell to my colleagues as well, and this may also sound very absurd because for me, PhD was the only option that I saw, for me, because I didn't know about what other things I could do. I could either do a training at BCIL that was popular at that time, okay, go
Got it.
for an industrial job. But then I heard, oh, they pay only this much, and then so I can totally relate. So I think in biotechnology, because in country like India you don't have much options, uh, that is also a reason that most of people do a PhD in spite of perhaps not
Yeah,
the real interest in doing science, but that's the option for
absolutely.
them to kind of, so we have to be like honest about it, and I think you were honest to
Absolutely.
yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
another thing, Manish, let's not
Mhm.
forget. I mean, I want to take that misnomer, if that exists, and push it out. Look, all of us at some point have to earn, and all
Absolutely.
of us
No,
come,
that's clear.
so you make practical life choices. And I
Absolutely.
want to say this, that I do come from a privileged background. I'm aware of it. I'm mindful out of it, and I'm thankful for it. But what you need to know also is, I also had in my head that I'm not just going to be that pretty face that gets married eventually and is dependent on her husband. That's not the kind of way I want to operate.
That's
So
boring, right? Like that's a
yeah,
bit boring.
yeah, and also, I didn't have the word for it back then, but feminism, what is that about? If you want equal opportunities, you have to have equal responsibilities, right? But what I'm getting to is, choosing to go study abroad was not an easy decision.
Mhm, mhm.
I had to take up a huge loan, right? Even though I didn't have to, I wanted to, because I wanted it to be about my effort and my responsibilities. And what I'm getting to is, I can imagine many people can't take that decision. They have families to take care of. I get that. So what I'm getting to is, there's a flowery side of keeping your options open, but there's also a practical side that people need to balance. But like I said, if you have purpose, if you have curiosity, options will open even in a later stage in life. So just because you didn't take the right, whatever right is, decisions in the first years, that's fine. You can always course correct in the future.
So, I mean, you said about your, educational background and stuff. Perhaps you can also highlight your current role as a director of digital and strategy, and how does your kind of, work impact the general public, so to say, the current
Absolutely.
role. Yeah.
So yes, couple of years ago, I again got lucky. Got an opportunity to understand how, let's call it, the digital world works. More specifically, how does software design work? How does the concept work? Um, and I got more into the topic of digitalization. And we look around, digitalization has probably hit every industry that we have access to: consumer health, consumers, legal even, and so forth. What it's not yet made an impact in enough of, in my opinion, is healthcare. I mean, we're getting there with medical devices, health apps, and so forth, but we're not there yet. So what I do today in the context of BioNTech is to bring digitalization to drug discovery and beyond. What that effectively means is, we all know that a drug discovery life cycle from phase one to approval can be anything between 8 to 15 years, depends on how lucky you are and how special the indication is, rare or not, and so forth. There are a lot of steps in these 8 to 10 years, 8 to 15 years, that are actually paused or stopped because of a lot of paperwork. It sounds crazy when I say this, but yes, there's a lot of
The
paperwork
documentation,
involved,
yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
human intervention involved, and of course, we still need human intervention, right? It's
Mhm.
humans we're talking about, but there's a lot of stuff here that can be automated, digitalized to be specified, and also a lot of the bottlenecks happen because we don't have, let's call it, a central source of data sets that we can learn from, and adapt our, let's say, clinical studies and so forth. So my current job ensures that the drug discovery phases are faster than what they are today. Many companies are working on it, so we're not the only one. Um, and I can just give you one, short example. I mean, all of us probably have experienced this. We're all on social media. Um, and clinical study recruitment requires the right participants to be included. So guess what we do when we're on social media? We're connecting to the kind of people um, we want to, and we kind of create, unfortunately, bubbles. And what is cool about this from a clinical recruitment perspective is that you can tap into those bubbles and recruit the right people in terms of inclusion criteria and so forth to actually get the clinical study to be recruited completely. And ideally, these groups also have the kind of statistically relevant results you want in the end. So this would be an example of an idea to bring digitalization to clinical studies. And also more recently, I've had the opportunity of thinking of um, how to integrate AI ML in our research business as well. So now I'm also
Mhm.
looking at preclinical. So, I'm sure this is not my job, I must say this, but we must have heard of something called the early warning system that BioNTech delivered. This was about judging the high risk variants of COVID. What was that? That was, let's say, modeling on steroids, that you could predict which variants could be harmful, that you could, indicate them to the government earlier. So this is a very interesting example how in early research you could
Mhm.
predict what is to come, and then, well, act from a
Mhm.
biology perspective as well.
And Aatraye, like just for my own curiosity, when you say modeling on steroids, do you mean like, implementation of AI or ML
Yeah,
concepts into modeling?
absolutely.
Mhm.
So for probably the structural biochemists and all the guys in the world, I mean, these words make sense to you when I say, you do individual modeling, you try to imagine how the protein structure could look like. But if you give those set of rules on how you would create your molecule to an algorithm and make it run at, 100 times the speed that your brain would as a human being, that's what I would say modeling on steroids. So you're not just predicting um, yeah, one or two kinds of sequences of, let's say, depending on the range you want to see, proteins or nucleotide, but you're able to do it for a huge types of combinations and permutations. So that would be modeling on steroids.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I came to your current role, but perhaps, you can also highlight, how did that transition from Cambridge? I think you were doing a bio entrepreneurship course there,
Correct,
like
correct. Hmm, hmm,
it
hmm.
was your second master's, right?
Correct, correct,
And
correct.
then, how you ended up being in BioNTech. What was your journey like?
This is 10 years journey now.
Mhm.
It's funny. You remember the early days and the cream in the middle, which is what this. I have to collect this together now. Okay. So I mentioned in my first masters, I noticed I want to know more about business. I found a couple of programs. There was one in Cambridge. There was in University of Karolinska. There was one in, I think back then Stanford used to do one for bioscience entrepreneurship. So again, limited options, but they were there. And I'm talking 10 years ago, so I'm guessing there's more out there now. I went to this program, and what it did is it was super packed. So it was 9 months to 1 year, depending on how much you wanted to stretch it. And within the 1 year, I think we barely slept as students. So some bonding experience, because we were taught about everything from let's say, how does FDA look at a particular drug, in what phase, those kind of questions, to also, for example, reading the balance sheet of AbbVie and Abbott when they split, right? So this was the kind of range of things we are talking about. And like I said, it really opened my brain. This was in Britain. I had no intentions to stay. I wanted to come back initially, like, I'm done. But I don't know, somehow there were reasons that made me say, okay, you know what, I'm not done yet. I have to stay here for a bit. Started looking for jobs. Wasn't easy for everyone out there. It's not easy. It's not easy. Not just because finding a job itself is difficult, but because you have to be sponsored for visas. I mean, 10 years ago, that was not possible.
Absolutely. No, and you should
And
highlight that because, I think the emphasis should be there, especially for people like, expats in the US and also in Europe. It's not just about your merit, but it's also about the visa and stuff. So go ahead on
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Happy to see that. I have statistics here. So I was quite late in applying for jobs, right? Because I didn't really want to. But when I did, I applied for 10. I got selected in 7, and only 3 decided to sponsor my visa. So there you go. You've got an example. And the funny thing is, I am sure that the rest of the 3 that didn't select, not just saying it because of confidence, but I can tell you because of some conversations, they had an internal filter. UK ranked number 1, EU ranked number 2, any other country TBD, right? So yeah, you filter out. They will never say it on an application, but you're filtered out if you don't, if you're not an easy recruit, right? Simply
Mhm.
put. And yeah, of those 3 that agreed to sponsor my visa, I went ahead and I worked with a company called Phynova, which is based out of Oxfordshire. 2 reasons. Firstly, wonderful people, startup in the space of converting plant-based chemicals into drugs and nutraceuticals. First, beautiful people. These are what I would say are examples of humans who like the traditional sciences, let's call it, but also understand the Western world. I mean, that was their business model, and they strive to take this ancient history of medication and therapy that exists and make it more modern friendly, something
Mhm.
like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, for the people, it was not easy. I mean, I was in a limbo for about a month and a half because my study visa was ending, and I needed to transfer to work visa ASAP because applying from outside of India would have taken way longer for approval. So I got lucky. Phynova agreed to give me this visa and pay for a good amount to get me that visa overnight. In a way, it wasn't overnight, but something like that. Yeah, so that was my first gig. Um, I also want to say I got lucky because Phynova perfectly fit what I did in my masters in Roorkee. Yeah, so I talked about how do we look at Ayurveda and things mentioned there as therapeutic and use that, for example, specifically Jamun for diabetes and diabetes and obesity. And Phynova was doing that looking at traditional Chinese medicine. So that was the cool part that fine, I didn't know traditional Chinese medicine, but the concepts were similar. I spent a couple of years there in multiple hats. I joined as R&D manager. I became a business development person in the middle if required. I also set up websites if
Yeah, in
needed.
startup you
Uh,
you get
so
to
you
wear multiple hats.
you
So
have to, right? It
yeah,
was that kind of a company. But look, these opportunities are fantastic. They've taught
absolutely.
me what
Mhm.
supply chain even means as a word beyond books and such. So yeah, I did that. Unfortunately, Brexit was announced,
Mhm.
or at least the vote for Brexit was announced. And I, having been through this whole visa nightmare, did not want to subject myself to that situation because you don't want to be in a place of negotiation where you have a lower hand, right? I need them, they don't need me in that way. So I started looking at what next can I do. So whatever was amazing about Phynova, it was still and not easy for me to continue there. Let's say because of the Brexit situation. So I started looking abroad, and then a friend told me about Merck in Germany in Darmstadt because it was trying to, let's say, go entrepreneurial, right? They were setting up what they were calling an innovation center,
Mhm.
and the concept here was to bring people who had dual degrees, science and
Business,
business,
yeah. Mhm.
and make them, yeah, see what's possible in a 350-year-old company as new products. So that's what attracted me to Merck. I came to Darmstadt. I actually joined through something called the in-house consulting program.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
another thing for the members here, there are so many programs that love dual degrees. You don't have to be a specialist. If you have a bit of
Absolutely.
both, it's
Mhm.
fine. Why? Because it takes time to go from science to business as a mindset.
And I
Very
know
challenging.
Merck in-house consulting so well because, I started my career from consulting uh,
Ah,
in a small boutique firm called Novomed, and I had some colleagues, who were actually in-house consultants there in Merck. Yeah,
fantastic,
yeah. So
fantastic. So
go
you
ahead.
probably know the kind of profiles it has, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, the journey started there. 3 months of projects across different parts of Merck, which meant life science, healthcare for me specifically, strategy as well in corporate. And then finally, I landed a gig in the innovation center like I wanted to, where I worked for the chief innovation officer as the there's a fancy word called chief of staff, but yeah, and there I got exposed to, let's say, the future of tech, right?
Mhm.
So we were already talking about application of blockchain in healthcare in 2016, which
Mhm.
already sounds like, oh my god, back then. But yeah, that's the hype cycle, right? It became a hype back then in 2016, 2017, and now we're still talking about it. So let's say, again, a lucky opportunity, but I learned about future of tech even more, on a, let's say, 10 to 15-year vision. And at the same time, I got an opportunity to start working as what now I would call it as, which is a digital product manager. So,
Mhm.
we had an idea, we saw a need in the market, of a digital product which could help a company know what it knows in terms of scientific technologies and platforms. And my manager, my boss, my mentor actually gave it to me and they said, can you make sense of what this means? I mean, we know there's a need, but does anyone else want it? We want it. Does anyone else want it? So this is what I meant, the opportunity to switch focus and
Mhm.
move into digital products and apply all the learnings I had as an entrepreneur to that area. What that meant was learning how products are created, what teams do you need, what skills do you need, how long do these things take, typical basics. Then understanding what need finding means, like when we say does the market need something like that, how does innovation begin and start, right? Those kind of basic topics. And I'd say in my couple of years in that role, I got it to a place where we had identified the need exists. We had identified there's a niche market for this. So,
Mhm.
more specifically, science and technology companies which have too many people, and there's a lot in their heads which can which can be pulled through automation. I'll get to that if needed. And I remember leaving that project when I realized I don't have the skills anymore to take it to the next level because it requires someone more seasoned in negotiations, in selling, in business development.
Mhm.
Um, and I then continued my journey in what's called Merck Life Science, where I worked to create digital products portfolio for supply chain, manufacturing, finance, and strategy. What that meant more specifically is, again, building products, but for to serving internal needs. Um,
Okay. Mhm.
simple question. I think I like to share this one. During COVID, we saw what happened, right? Supply chain was completely bottlenecked. Um, and it was no one's fault. It was, uncertainty. Countries were closing. Um, supply chain. I mean, employees are not there. What would you build? So, for example, I got the privilege to work on models that can kind of do a digital twin of a supply chain, and where the bottleneck could be. And let's say this was fantastic because I started with a title and then I ended with a team, which I had the privilege to hire, train. This was really, really fantastic. Um, Maybe one thing to share here. So, funny story. I'm based out of Germany. Our team was working across basically US, Darmstadt, East and West Coast US, Darmstadt, and in obviously Bangalore, right? In this space, you always have the experts from familiar countries. And just want to mention, people were impressed or they trusted me because I knew the science, but I was not an expert in it. That's the funny part. Um, so I could talk to a researcher, I could talk to a manufacturing person, using words like, the centrifuge we produce, right? So the wording was there. But I didn't bore them or I didn't go to the details of how a centrifuge works that they just didn't want to talk to me. I could when I was talking to a scientist if that was my end user, but I didn't have to. And another thing to think about is what I missed. I had a wonderful team. More specifically, I think we created a wonderful team together by bringing um, various diversity of background, skills. What I was really missing was biology. It's unbelievable because we don't think about it in India, right? So most of my engineers purely studied engineering, and then maybe they did some management, unsurprising, and then they decided to come to business and code or whatever. But nobody had a biology background, right? So I just looked at myself and said, how could I have inculcated more of me in them? How do I do that? Because I love to teach, that's fine. But why isn't it coming inherently, from our developers in India? Anyone learning computer sciences, why is no one coming from the biology standpoint? And if it ever happens, it's bioinformaticians, right? But then bioinformaticians are too important to code SQL and Python for digital, right? So there's like a clear gap. And I would highly encourage people to think about that career trajectory, that you have, I don't know, a bachelor's or master's in biology, and you have some coding skills, to then think of becoming what I started out as, a digital product owner, because that gives you this unique skill set most people don't have in India specifically, but also abroad. It's missing. You either have the biology or the programming, not often both.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then couple of years there, and then BioNTech came in the world. It made its big impact. Everybody wanted to be a part of the founder story. It's been quite a story, as we all know. And I heard about the strategy role opening up, which allowed me to do what I'm doing now.
Mhm. I would also like to, because you have such an interesting profile, Aatraye, I think you also delve into startup, right? Like you started something which is called ConnectedCareMe, and I wanted to also touch base there. So what inspired you to kind of start on that journey, and what was it all about?
Absolutely. It's still very close to my heart. And for many people, they still ask me, why am I not doing anything? Why am I not continuing? So let's talk about a failed startup, but a successful experience. So look,
No,
I've lived
I
in,
consider nothing as failure. I think, it's all experience. So
I agree. I
yeah,
agree. I think, but it's just important to acknowledge words like failure to make it more normal,
absolutely.
that it's fine. It didn't work out. It didn't work out.
That's okay. Yeah.
You learned and you move on. So easily said, and I'm sure Manish, you have a similar experience. When you come to a new country, and in my case, it happened 4 times or more. Understanding how the system works is already too difficult. You
Mhm.
know, um, I remember even not knowing how to buy grocery when I moved to the UK for the first time. Like how, where, what? Okay, so getting healthcare was another challenge because again, you're used to your knock on the doctor's door and you get an appointment, or somebody who knows somebody in
And
the
you
in
were
the
coming
local
from a
way.
doctor's family, right?
Exactly. So for me, getting access to a doctor meant calling my dad up, right? So it was never it was never a challenge, but it becomes a challenge when you leave the country and your father can't help you because he can't get you medication. His prescriptions won't work. He's not recognized as a UK, Germany, US doctor, right? So what do you do? So I went through this cycle 4 times, as I mentioned. Every time starting from scratch. So how does the insurance work? How do I get an appointment? How do I even, okay, in Germany, especially, how do I even communicate to my doctor about my previous health history? So all of this led to a lot of, let's say, frustration in my personal life. And I also noticed I was not alone. So there were many, let's use the word expats. But what I mean by expats is not fancy people on a beach drinking a martini, but more people who are living outside of their country for a longer period of time. I notice there's a need where people want to stay connected to their comfort healthcare, so
Mhm.
whatever their home country is, and obviously want to be treated in the host country, for in certain cases continuing diseases like diabetes and so forth, or allergies, but also for new diseases. They want that comfort from home. And that's what came to the idea of ConnectedCareMe,
Mhm.
which aimed to connect your home doctor to your host country doctor, such that you as a patient don't have to repeat your problem again and again in three different ways. Not just the problem, but also the history, and also, normalize some cultural conversations between them. So I like to share this one very specific example. So I've had, since my lab days, a nail fungal infection since like forever. I think, when did I step in a lab? 17, 18, and then since then. And every year at a particular point in time, it comes back every year. Um, so I knew this back home in Delhi, and I knew I needed, topical treatments and steroids depending on how bad it got. But it was difficult in every country I went to explain, guys, topical doesn't work. I have had, it's a chronic condition. It's been 10 years. I need prescriptions and so forth. So I had to repeat. And more importantly, I had to find a doctor to start with and see if they were free. And this is where I thought, what if my, let's say, home country doctor could just pass all the history and the prescriptions, either through me or because of, them knowing me, to the host country doctor. And then the host country doctor has an additional data point. They can still talk to me, but they have 10 years of written documents and I don't have to repeat myself. So that was one specific example, that led to me considering this.
So you were
Some good stuff
basically
happened.
trying to solve your own problem, right? So you faced the
Yeah.
problem and
My
you were
my
trying to
own
solve
problem,
it.
but also, as I said, in the bubble of people I was living in, I noticed it was an issue for everyone. I mean, a lot of people will,
Mhm.
being candid about
Relate.
it,
Yeah, no,
relate.
absolutely.
And let me give you examples. People bring their own antibiotics from their home countries, and it's not just Indians. Yeah.
Mhm. No,
Yeah,
no,
other,
you're right.
yeah,
Yeah.
people in Europe, they travel with antibiotics. They travel with prescription drugs which they shouldn't have in the house beyond a certain amount, but they do because getting access here is very difficult. So yeah, it started with me wanting to solve my own problem and that of friends and family around me. And as I was getting to, there was some good stuff. Like I got into startup circles in Germany. I actually set up an UGE, which already is a lot of paperwork in Germany.
Mhm.
We got through some startup competitions. So, the company got selected in Antler in Berlin. We also got European Health, there's, I forget the name of it, um, but there was a health entrepreneurship fund, and there we got selected as one of the companies to pitch,
Wow.
which basically exposed us to hospitals and other doctors to basically do testing of the idea, right, if it works or not. I keep saying we, because I had a lot of supporters. I was not alone in the journey, but I never had a co founder.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
that's actually where things started to fall apart a little bit, because you wish you would do this alone. It's not possible, for
That's
many
tough.
reasons. We won't go into the bad ones, but the good reasons is you always need a partner to brainstorm. This, again, this expert attitude of I'll go ahead and do my own thing my way, this doesn't work here.
No, I
Um,
think I can
so,
quite relate to this, Aatraye.
yeah.
To your point, I think we have our highs and lows, and during your lows, you need somebody to push you. So that's where the co-founder, kind of helps because you
Absolutely,
both keep
absolutely. And
pushing
also
each other.
split the work. Also split the work. And I'm not saying a human is not complete on their own. What I'm saying is you can't always be 24/7 full charged with
Absolutely.
energy. So you need to split the work. You need to, as you said, balance the highs and lows with somebody. Thankfully, I have that person in my personal life, but in the co-founder world, I couldn't find anyone. I looked for about a year and a half, and then eventually I noticed that I'd kind of funded this. So I developed, with the group of people, a prototype. All of this came with some investments. So I noticed I couldn't invest on it anymore. The little bit of money we got through these grants was drying out, and eventually I had to kill the company last year. And by that it means officially closing it from the public register in Germany. But what I want to say is the concept is not closed. And that's some message to think about. Like, a lot of people, as I said, they're still asking me, why aren't you doing something about it? So it's an unsolved problem.
Mhm.
And any of the listeners who like the area of healthcare, think about it, because with with what happened with COVID, one global healthcare is only going to become more important in the time to come. We started to respect different countries' healthcare systems a little bit. We started to be aware of them, and maybe there's a future where I could get consulted by a doctor in the US, as quickly as I can in Germany if I want to for a rare disease. Why not?
Wow. So, I mean, what are the important lessons that you learned, through this entrepreneurial journey? Question one. And question two is like, was this all parallel? Was this all a side hustle along with your main job? So, mhm.
Yeah, I like the second question. Let me go with that first because it already has a lesson. So look, I was doing well in my day job. Um, my team was great. We liked the work we were doing. We saw the point of it, but there was still something missing, and that was the patient centricity. So I didn't know what to do about it because I wanted to keep both the how they say I wanted to keep both my hands full. So I dared to go to my boss and I said, look, I really want to work on this idea and actually um, let's start with this. I have worked on it. And I just wish I could get a formal approval from the company that I can continue exploring this idea a bit more in my private time. I learned in Merck, and again, thankful to the company for allowing me that there was a clause where you just have to declare that there's nothing in competition to the company you're
Nothing,
working
conflict
for.
of interest should be not there.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And you will give that Germany require 12 hours of rest between jobs. That's a must have. But if you can follow those, you can do what you want. So yes, for the side hustle part of phase, I think I did a side hustle for 6 months officially with Merck's agreement. And then when, let's say, the startup got accepted in programs which required more energy from me, this is when I took, let's call it, I basically used up all my holidays from Merck, and also I took an unpaid leave for 1 month, basically 2 months of focused work, and that kind of was like the make or break that I had given to it. That look, this is my fully dedicated, completely penniless time. Let's hope things work out in that much time, and even if I see a little glimpse of hope, I will continue. So yeah, it was a side hustle for the longest time. um, I think, yeah, 2 months were the only time when I didn't have two jobs. So, and the learning here I want to share is if you really have a vision and you want to do something, even the people you think don't want to support you will support you. So, Merck had no reason to allow me to do this. Why should they? They did because they saw that I was coming from a place of purpose. um, Actually, I'm in touch with my ex team where everyone's still, again, these got the guys asking me, what are you doing about this now, how far did it progress? So that's one lesson. So keep asking. People see the purpose, they join your vision. Other learnings, there's a lot to unpack there. I think the first thing, we've mentioned many times before, talk to people, test your ideas. Even if you're not hearing good stuff, most people will not say good stuff. It's good because even if you want to go ask for money, to, of course, for getting the idea to become bigger, you'll be asked the same questions. Maybe the level of detail will change. Maybe some people will have a vision, but the questions will be there. So talk to a lot of people when you have an idea. Don't take everything to heart, but do take everything to mind, to answer them when required. Ask for help. um, there's no shame in that. So a lot of friends have come to, let's say, help me understand how to read German documents, because however much German I know, I don't know enough to do legal stuff in it. So ask for help. People are always, again, willing to help you. um, do a lot of research. There's no going back on that. So people are one source of research. You have to keep reading and increasing your knowledge in a space. There's no doubt about that. You have to be obsessed with wanting to solve the problem. It just doesn't happen in a 9 to 5 way. It doesn't work like that at all. um, and yeah, I mean, don't be scared to make mistakes. I'm saying that all the time. That's why using the word failure, because it's really an iterative approach. You do it once, you learn from it. If you don't learn from it, you again make the mistake, but this time the impact is bigger, so you will learn from it. Yeah, those would be lessons, I'd say.
Amazing, amazing. So yeah, coming back to your current role at BioNTech, so what are the key skills that you think are valuable for your current role, and how can a student or an aspirant for if somebody wants to go that path, what would be your recommendation for them?
Absolutely. So let's start by saying, so look, strategy, simply put, because many people will associate different words to it, is having an overview of what is now and what is next, right? And then you can bridge the gap. I'll distribute the skills for being in strategy in general, and then more specifically, digital strategy in a few baskets. Number one, people skills. You really need to talk to people and learn how to ask the right questions to get the right information. Um, you and I can talk also here for 50 minutes, but you may not get what you need. So you need to ask the right questions. You need to, again, be, I use this word constantly, curious. You just don't want to ask the question, you want to understand the answer. So again, curiosity and asking the right questions is one important topic. And also you need to have the thought process of someone who thinks in the future. Um, and of course, future is 20 years, 15 years, 5 years. You kind of have to distribute the lens this way. Um, 5 to 10 years is a good, fair way to look at strategy overall. And more specifically, 3 years, but then keep the 5 to 10 year horizon in your mind as well. In terms of more technical skills, um, because I'm coming from a place of drug discovery, knowing the basics of drug discovery is important. Um, if you even know the science and technology behind it better, right? So I use my science, but not as an expert. Um, it also helps to know a bit about, so because I'm more specifically in data products, data digital solutions, learn a little bit about languages that help you query data. What does that even mean? So basics of data analytics, that helps. Um, and yes, big one, project management skills. Don't forget that. So within the world of digital and data, project management doesn't necessarily work waterfall. It works agile. You'll hear the word Scrum, Kanban, la la la. So again, learning this helps because you can speak the language of both the technical developers as well as the biologists in the room, as I mentioned. Um, and if you're really into it, I'm starting it to get into the details of learning the language. So I'm now last 2 months trying to get my hands dirty with Python. So there's no limit to learning. But I'd say you don't need to be a Python expert to do the job.
Mhm.
You just need to know what it means.
And for the people perhaps who didn't understand what you mentioned about the waterfall methodologies and agile and Kanban and stuff, perhaps you can add to it that that in a continuous development process, I think agile methodologies are like better used. Perhaps you can
Absolutely,
highlight
absolutely.
that, yeah, on that.
Absolutely. So
No.
it's for project management or management of anything. You will see 2 points. Do you know what you're doing as a path, or you know your goal but you don't know the path? If your answer is, I know exactly where we want to reach, the goal is clear and the path is clear, you want to do what is called waterfall project management. It's called waterfall because if you see the way you do timelines, it flows like a waterfall. So you do one thing first and then another thing and then another thing. There are dependencies, there are parallel things, but it's kind of clear how you'll get there and how much time, with a little bit of here there estimation. But life is often not like that, especially if you are developing something which has no end. So um, I think Simon Sinek calls it the never ending game. So if you are in the cycle of projects which finish and then you start something new, that's not also often life. And that's when agile project management comes in. You kind of know your goal, but how to get there has to be iterated, learned, and developed. That's for example where the words like Kanban, more specifically Scrum, for example, will come by, where what you are saying is you are clear that you have to give something with decent quality in a good amount of time, and you have to reach a goal, but you improve the way to get there from your previous experiences. So I can even give a very specific example. You time box a lot. So you say, okay, look, we'll do a 4 week whatever cycle. It could be ideation, development, whatever you want to do.
Mhm.
We meet every day to see how we are doing. Short updates, no more. But in 4 weeks, we will see what we had decided to do. That even makes sense. Maybe it's like we have a map, we know where to go, but after 4 weeks we realize we ended up going to another country by mistake, and now we need to recalibrate and come back. Or we can change our path. Maybe there's a faster way to get to my goal on that map. from the country I'm in. So that would be agile. And to be fair, agile is not softwares or tools you use, but the way you think. That you can't have this, straight only one way of doing things. It's okay to change your course if the task demands it.
Absolutely. Yeah, with that, I think comes the next question about, what are the biggest challenges that you face in your current work, and, how do you overcome them? Because,
Yeah,
you were
yeah,
mentioning
yeah,
about,
yeah. I
yeah.
like the way you also phrased it, overcome, because it's again a never-ending journey.
Mhm.
So, the example I gave about agile waterfall, this itself is not common in the industries that we are working in today, right? So we are used to working in sequential waterfall diagrams. So to even get people to get comfortable with this iterative approach is difficult, because the very first question people will ask you is, how long will it take? Well, depends. If it's a certain problem, I can tell you, if it's not even clear what the problem is, because you've said one line to me and that doesn't mean much, it depends. It really, the answer, it depends. So getting people comfortable with, um, either knowing exactly what scope you want and running with that, or learning as you go with some direction in mind, this itself is difficult. How we overcome it often is, firstly, it takes time. So if you're talking to people who've done project management for a long time in their life, they know the realities of life, right? So they will adapt to it quickly. But those who've not done this themselves, you need to educate them. You have to talk to them, you have to convince them. And again, every call doesn't mean they'll agree, but you are slowly making them open to that idea. The second thing we've experienced, and by we I mean not just me, but my team overall, is that there's a lot of misunderstanding of what data science, data analytics in general is. Many people believe, you take a magic wand and everything comes together and you have a predictive algorithm. That's not how it works. You need cross-functional, multi-skills in a group of people to basically firstly understand the problem and then see if there's a solution out there. So, it's not like how sometimes these big companies, tech companies, help us think, like the Googles and Facebooks. Chat GPT was not developed overnight. If you guys are using that, it's someone told me when Chat GPT 1 and 2 came out, nobody cared, and that was a couple of years, quite a lot of years ago. And now suddenly it's become mainstream, so people are talking about it, right? So again, it's not a magic wand. It's iterative and therefore fast, but things take time to develop, and it's not done through three or four kinds of skills only. You have a multidisciplinary team. So to educate people about this also, again, you firstly have to educate, and then sometimes it helps to show by doing. So in my current role, for example, I've taken up a project and trying to run it agile, and it's not been done before. So let's see what the response is. But of course, if you come out of it with some sort of successes, people get convinced.
Wow. So yeah, you mentioned a lot of challenges, and how you overcome them. And I would like to ask this question specifically because you are women, right? And women in STEM, I've heard like they face, say, some additional problem when compared to men. Would you like to highlight them? And also like what advice would you give to other women who want to pursue a career in STEM?
Yeah, so I have to say, I think it's a woman thing, and I say this because I am talking to women from different cultures.
Mhm.
It's a women thing to be accommodating somehow, and it's a women's thing to not make people uncomfortable. So we try to bring in harmony, and I say we because I'm massively feminist, and I think it's a great skill to have. So often as a woman, I found myself, and I still find myself today, where I can't be the devil's advocate. That's not expected out of me. I'm supposed to be the one keeping things together, which again is important. But sometimes you need to have that critical eye in the room and be that bad person in the room, right? So as a woman, that's difficult sometimes, because people are just confused why you're not playing that role. Um, so for the women out there, don't be scared to be the antagonist in the meeting sometimes, to ask the question nobody's asking. Don't assume people know the answer to the question you want to ask because it's so stupid. Most likely nobody's thought about it. And basically, don't self censor yourself. Don't do that. You learn what can and cannot be said, but don't start by putting a censor layer to yourself overall. Another more practical advice, except for self-censoring, don't do self-censoring, is um, someone told me this quite recently. Um, Ask for a seat in the room, because often, and I still do that, so it's also a learning place for me. Often we assume that seat will be given to you, right? So you'll do hard work, people will see it, and then at some point in time they will see your point and your value, and it's handed over to you. That doesn't often happen. It can, it doesn't have to happen this way. It's really about going there and saying, yes, I want it, can I have it? And if not, then why not? What am I missing today? Ask for the seat in the room, ask for the seat on the table. um, and yeah, ask for what you really want to get to the next step. um, the, the reason I actually learned about this is because I was told this from one of my ex bosses, that I didn't realize you had huge ambitions. And I said, how is that not obvious? Said, that's obvious. Like, no, it's not. Because, there are people, and I would like to believe men often ask for what they want more boldly, and the women don't. So, yeah, don't
That's a
censor
great advice.
yourself. Yeah, and ask
Mhm.
for what you want. Most likely, people don't realize your ambitions. Most likely, they don't realize you don't feel you have a voice.
Amazing. Yeah, that brings to, the next question about, so you were mentioning about Chat GPT 1, 2, 3, and 4 happened very closely. And I'm like really a big user of that, because I'm also like, doing a lot of marketing stuff, using
Oh,
it.
cool.
It's
Nice.
great for content generation and stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
in your field, how do you stay up to date with the latest developments? And are there any resource, or any advice also to people who want to kind of develop skill
Yeah,
sets in your field? What would be that?
yeah. So this is going to be a hard one for me to answer, because the field is ever evolving,
Mhm.
right?
And that's why, all the
Ah,
need to be even
it's
more updated. Yeah.
exactly. So, as always, two sources of information: humans and reading, or secondary research. So keep talking to people. I bully people on LinkedIn sometimes. Bullying is probably not the right word. I approach a lot of people on LinkedIn, similar to Manish doing here. So don't hesitate if you feel there's a person who you would want to learn about or understand what they're doing. They'll decide to not talk to you, they don't want to, but they can also choose to talk to you. So
And
find ways to
don't assume things, just try your best. This is what I say.
exactly. So reach out to people on
Mhm.
social media, attend conferences as a listener. You don't always have to be there only as a presenter. The typical scientific conferences, was just from a digital space. um, for those who are very much into the coding world, I mean, hackathons and so forth, you probably already know. There are many events where like-minded people are brought together in hackathons, and this is also where you can learn new technology trends. um, so yeah, again, first things, people. Second, research, desk research. So again, it depends on what you're interested in. But for example, medical apps, medical devices, basically, can you treat depression through an app with behavioral therapy, for example? These are things that didn't exist 5, 10 years ago. So if you try to read review articles on it, it will be hard. However, what you can do is the typical Science Direct and so forth, read about digitalization in healthcare life science, and then you start to see trends which you want to go into deeper and deeper. What I'm getting to is these are none of these are perfect sciences, none of these are perfect businesses. Um, so, in short, start with getting an overview of different topics that maybe from me or others you think are interesting for you, and then depending on where you reach, continue reading on the details. But again, have the overview. That's the big picture. For me, more recently, online MOOCs are really helping. So I'm personally doing a lot of training on edX, Coursera's, and things like that. And they're rich resources. So LinkedIn Learning for the basics of business, they're not bad. um, I've actually been refreshing my learnings in Scrum on LinkedIn Learning. It's not that bad. It's not great, but it's not that bad. So I would say online MOOCs is a good source, and more specifically the Harvard edX, Coursera I really like, and LinkedIn Learnings. I think LinkedIn Learnings is very business oriented, so
Mhm.
something I would advise.
Awesome. And Aatraye, there's so much of things happening in the life sciences, especially with AI and ML that you mentioned. So I would definitely ask this question: how do you see, the future of life sciences? What's your vision
Yeah,
of?
yeah, yeah. You can never predict the future when it comes to these things because I don't think anyone saw content generators like ChatGPT. At least I didn't 5, 6 years ago. Right. So definitely, we've all been talking about it, but with AI ML, it's going to get more personalized, right? Um, why? Because the problem in the past has been you can keep talking about personalization, but that basically means a lot of data points, and no human can digest all of it. So for me, in short, AI ML will enable more personalized healthcare. What that means is let's make it more consumer health oriented first. A very specific diet nutrition plan tailored to you based on your genetics, your environment, your lifestyle, your behavioral patterns, and so forth. So going back to my favorite topic, you can be more healthy based on you and not because of your parents only, right? And the genetics that they carry. Um, Another thing, again, coming to drug discovery, more personalized. So it's not going to be a treatment that is for all or the majority, um, but maybe we have a very specific. I'm going to now draw from my BioNTech world, mRNA tailored to you as a human being. So because it's not just about research, but also making that, manufacturing that unique drug that is only for you. So I could say consumer health is going to get impacted, drug discovery will get impacted. Um, and I think the last part we're already seeing ourselves. Um, we as humans will become more in charge of our own health. So I don't want to say the doctors go away. I don't want to say the specialists go away, but you yourself can diagnose yourselves more and potentially treat yourselves more, depending on the regulations. I'm being clear and safe
Mhm.
here.
Yeah.
But it's going to be more health in your control, just like
Mhm.
banking. I mean, I love the example of banking. Once upon a time, you needed your banker to do everything for you, right?
Yeah.
I
Not
don't know how many times now we go to banks and
we
cancel
rarely
this.
visit. Yeah. That's so true. Yeah.
So the financial health has been automated. Let's see if
The
human health
personal.
is also personalized and automated in the future.
Amazing. And yeah, now, the final question for this podcast is about always, career tips and advice that you'd like to give to, biotech students.
Oi, 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 oi. Tips. Um,
Career
ah,
tips, yeah.
yeah. Um, Seek opportunities. We've talked about that. Look around. The world is big. The world is beyond labs. I'm not saying labs is not a good option, but there is a world outside of that which
Mhm.
uses your skills as well. Um, feel feel confident to ask the why more concretely. Always keep questioning why you do what you do, and also asking others why they expect something. May that be business or personal life. Um, you can never stop learning in this field. I think with many fields, you can't ever stop learning. The space of science is beauty because there's always more to know. So keep learning, keep your mind open and curious. Also to accept something that you thought was different, right? So you can't just reject outcome and data if just because it doesn't really fit your belief system. So keep your mind open and curious and learn. Um, and keep building your networks. I think that really helped me in life. Um, you are not just a scientist, you're not just a biologist. In beauty and innovation comes through interdisciplinary thinking. Be friends with people you don't speak the language of. I used to think, I can't talk to management students. I mean, I am that person now. So be open to talking to people who are not experts of your field, because that's when your brain actually grows. That would be all from my side.
Wow. So thank you, Aatraye, for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a pleasure talking with you. So, and yeah, to the audience, thank you for tuning to Biology Career Insights. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to get the latest episode delivered straight to your device. See you next time. Bye, Aatraye. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Manish. Bye.
Bye.